Hey guys, welcome back to the House of Gouldians. In this particular episode, we're going to be looking at the first of the Mutation project, and particularly a pod project that I'm starting this year. So for year one, we're going to be looking at 4 different pairs and what we're going to be doing and why we're pairing those up and what we're hoping to get out of that, and discussing what the end goal to that particular project is. So that's part 1 of the show, which is under the banner of the commoners. And then part 2 of the show, we're going to be looking at how to get your birds through the molt. So I've shared some tips and some tricks that I've found over the years that have worked for me, and that I lose very few birds during the molt season because of those tips. So yes, I hope you get the benefit out of today's show. Those are the 2 sort of aspects of the show. Then I wanted to highlight 2 comments in particular. Thank you very much to David and to AH Birds for your sort of questions. So David wanted me to do a show on breeding blues, and that's certainly something that we're going to be covering in the next couple of weeks. So yes, David, keep sort of watching. We're going to be definitely covering that topic for you. And then AH Birds, you asked about how to produce a jumbo Gouldian. So it's an interesting topic, and I don't want to get into too much detail now because it's actually a full sort of episode on itself. But in a nutshell, it's something that you would have to do polygenically. So what I mean by that is you would have to pair your biggest bird to another big bird and then slowly increase size over time. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, your show birds are typically a little bit bigger than your typical pet shop birds, if you like. So they're a little bit more robust. And certainly the European standard would require a bird being a fair bit bigger than the wild bird. Now, your starting point would obviously be the biggest birds you can find, and then you pair those back together so that you increase over time. Size in particular seems to come more from the hen though, so ideally you want your hens to be as big as possible, and the reason being is that they would produce slightly bigger eggs, which would lead to bigger chicks, and hopefully genetically they would grow up to be slightly more robust birds. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's polygenically bred, so you need to breed your biggest example to biggest example, and then increase that over time through selective breeding. The other sort of tip that I can give you is to be careful you don't start inbreeding the birds. And I say that because one of the sort of side effects of inbreeding is that it tends to reduce size. So yeah, I hope that's sort of given you a quick answer to your question, and thank you very much for that. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the show. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at the first of our mutation projects. Now, I was surprised this year in 2021 in that I bred a bird that I honestly didn't expect to sort of come out from the pairing that I did. So the original cockbird was this particular fellow over here, and you'll see I'm holding him like that for a reason. I wanted to show you the nape of the bird. So you'll notice that there's the odd yellow feather in the back of the neck or nape. And this bird comes from a line of birds that the breeder was specifically trying to develop the yellow nape. So we know that he had it in his blood, but when I first got him, he didn't have any visual feathering at all that would indicate he was yellow nape. So even though he was from that line, I didn't think him to be yellow nape. But as he's sort of matured and he's molted out each year, we've had more of these yellow feathers starting to appear, which would indicate a progressive nature in the yellow nape mutation. And I paired him, because I wasn't expecting to sort of get anything sort of unusual out of him. I just wanted to produce some yellow hens. I paired him to a normal orange-headed, white-breasted greenback. But by chance, she was also from the same yellow nape sort of family, if you like. From that, it was a bird I bred, but her father was from the same line. So there is potential that even though she's a plain greenback with no yellow naping in at all, there might be a recessive aspect of it. And when you combine the two, you end up with the following bird. Now, this is a young bird that hasn't fully coloured up yet, but already you can see when she's drinking is that there's this green sort of blotching across her shoulders or wings at the back, across the back of the bird. So what is a pied as such? Well, a pied, by definition, is a bird that has two or more colours in an area where there's traditionally a single colour. And you'll get things like pied kingfishers, which are black and white, but they can also be different colours. So in the Gouldians case, it would be a green base with yellow feathering, or if it's a blue mutation, it would be blue with white feathering. But this particular bird is a yellow bird with a green blotch. So it's a little bit, should have say, outside of the traditional bracket of a pied bird, in that the base colour would be normally your wild colour, with then your mutation colouring coming through in blotches. So the hen and the cock, the yellow-naped cock, produced that youngster that I showed you. So now what are we going to do with it? So for me, the ultimate goal is to try and get to a point where it's 50-50. So you can't tell really whether it's a green bird with yellow or yellow with green. And I say that because if you look at the show standards worldwide, not just in South Africa, you'll see that they talk, whether it be Bengalese or cockatiels or whatever it might be, you'll see that the show standard ideal is a 50-50 split. So that's what the end goal is. But to get there, we first need to establish more than one of these birds, and then we can start, once we have enough of them and they're genetically diverse enough, we can then start saying, okay, let's try and increase on the volume of that blotching to try and get to the 50% mark. So what are we going to do? Right, so project, or part one of the project, is we're going to repair the hen and the cock bird. And the reason being is that I'm hoping to produce in his final year of breeding, because he's a 4-year-old bird, he's a 2018 run bird, I'm hoping to produce more visuals that I can then utilize in the project. What we're also going to be doing though is we're going to pair up the visual youngster once she's reached a year in maturity. Remember, you don't ideally want to breed a bird that's under a year, especially a hen, because you're risking egg binding. So we're going to wait for her to reach June of 2022 before we try and pair her up. What I may do is that I introduce her to her normal orange-headed, purple-breasted greenback that I'm going to breed her with, but not put in a breeding box or allow them to actually start breeding until she's reached maturity. So that's step 2 of the project. So step 1 we said was the original, as you can see here, and step 2 we said we're going to then take the first visual bird and breed her back to a normal. And with both of these pairings, we're hoping to produce more birds that we can then work with. So that's that side of it. But when you're working with a new mutation in your line, or a new mutation, and the genetic inheritance isn't 100% certain, one of the things that we need to do is test breed. So we're wanting to take the birds and establish, is it recessive, is it dominant, is it a progressive scenario on that particular mutation. So I'm going to take the sister to the hen, the original hen, which I have, and I'm going to pair her up to a dilute, black-headed, purple-breasted dilute. Now, ideally from a head color perspective, I would have liked to have kept it to an orange head, but I've chosen this bird as I feel that I would like to also see if we can get the mutation into other head colors. So yeah, that was the thinking behind it, although it's not ideal. But the point is that if the mutation requires a copy of yellow and a copy of green to be visual, then it could explain why we got youngsters from the hen and the yellow-naped pairing, even though the hen didn't have any of the yellow feathering in her neck. So the sister bird, if you like, is a non-visual, and we're expecting to get all non-visual chicks out of her, but we may be surprised because now we've added that yellow mutation into the youngsters, and then we will know that the sort of genetic or mutation is coming from both the cock and the hen side of things. So that's why we test breeding the sister to the original hen. The next pairing that we're going to be looking at is the sibling to our visual. So she's also a yellow hen, as you can see from the photo, but she doesn't have any of the green blotching. And what I want to do with her is I want to pair her up to a normal greenback, and we can expect to produce some dilutes from that, as well as the sort of normal sort of combinations of that. I don't expect any parting to come out either in the form of yellow nape or in the form of the back colouring. But those youngsters then we can take and we can then use in the project to test for recessive going forward as part of our tests. It's not to say that it will be the case. I don't think that this is going to be a recessive type part, but it's something that we do need to test for. So we can then take her, and it will be one of our pairings from any offspring that are non-visual, either from the parents or her sibling at a later stage, obviously when they're not so closely related. So a couple of generations down the line, we can use those chicks to start testing for that. So in other words, the total project looks as follows. So you're going to have two where we've got visual birds that we breeding back in the hopes of getting more examples, and then on the other half of the project we sort of negative testing, if you like. We're trying to see, well, if they're non-visual, can they still pass on any kind of genetics in the offspring. So yeah, that's basically the project in a nutshell for year one. And then once we get through year one and we know what the offspring have been, we'll then sort of come back to it and we'll decide where we're going for year two and year three, remembering we're ultimately working towards a bird that is 50-50 in terms of the back coloration. So that's our PARD project in a nutshell. Hi guys, welcome to the education portion. So this part of the show, we're going to talk specifically about getting your birds through the molt. So there's a bunch of sort of tips or tricks that I can share with you that will really help. The first of which actually starts before the molting season, and that's during the breeding season. And that is, please don't be tempted to go past the second round. Why do I say that? Well, your hen birds, remember, it takes a lot for them to produce the eggs. There's a lot of calcium being drained from their bodies, other minerals to form the eggshells, to the proteins to actually form the sort of albumin and that kind of thing in the egg. So the hen birds in particular are having an enormous strain put on them during the breeding season. And what I've found in my own experience is that the moment I go past that second round and I start going for a third round, the hens are just left in a state where their little bodies are just too weakened to then get through the molt successfully. Now, I'm not saying that they will die. You may find that you can get them through, and maybe you've got good supplements that are working for you, but I would rather not take that chance. For me, I would rather have a hen survive through the molting season, and then I can use her again the next year and get another 2 rounds out of her, opposed to going for 3 rounds and that's it. Now I'm getting 4 rounds or 6 rounds out of that hen during her breeding sort of lifespan, if you like. So for me, 2 rounds is cut off, and I'll actually take the nest boxes away the moment those chicks fledge from round 2, and then as soon as the chicks have weaned, I will then split my hens and cocks, which brings me to the next sort of tip, if I can call it that, in getting the birds through the molt. And why would I do that? Well, your biggest enemy for a molting bird is environmental stresses. Okay, their bodies are already under so much stress from the nutrients that it takes to produce new feathers that you really don't want to be adding to that physical stress with environmental stresses. So if you keep your cock and hen birds together, you might find that your cock bird is not ready to give up on breeding, and now he's pushing your hen to try and get her to breed that third round, even though you've taken the nest boxes away. So I prefer to split my hens and cocks, and you'll see here as an example where I put 3 cock birds together. Now, I keep low densities, so normally they will go into flights, but with the forming and that this year, I've done things a little bit differently because I've needed to compartmentalize certain birds, and I've put these 3 together. You'll notice there's not 9, 12 birds in this small flight cage because it's not enough space, and when the birds are overcrowded, that's another environmental stressor. The next thing you'll see to reduce stress, I've actually put in stress perches. So I have these type of perches in my breeding cages as well, sometimes depending on the pair. It takes up extra space, so if I know the pair are well bonded and they're not squabbly and that amongst themselves, then I don't always put a stress perch in during breeding. But during molting, you won't find one of my cages where I've got molting birds that doesn't have a stress perch in it. And the reason being is that if the bird is feeling a little bit under the weather, he's feeling a little bit bullied by other birds, whatever, he's got somewhere to go that he feels safe, that he's protected on all sides. Birds seldom attack from underneath, so that's why the stress perches are open from underneath. They've got a slanted roof so that the attacking bird can't land on the roof and give the bird a hard time. So that is the reason why there's stress perches in the cage. While we're on the topic of stress, one of the worst things that you can do during the molting season is to buy and sell birds. They are under so much stress from the molt, and now you take them and you're putting them in a new environment where they've got to sort out a new pecking order amongst birds that they've never met before. They've got to now discover where your food bowls are, where your water is, where they can get grit from, and all that kind of thing. And for us as human beings, that might not seem like a big deal, but for the birds, those are things that really cause additional stress. And like I said to you before, their bodies are under so much sort of pressure in terms of production of new feathers that the last thing they need is any kind of environmental stress. And what I found in my experience is that when I used to buy birds, should I say, that were still molting, I'll end up losing a high percentage of those birds. Now, you'll get breeders out there that'll tell you, oh no, it's not a problem, they never lose birds and they buy and sell in the molt. Yeah, I would question that, because for me personally, I've found that's not the case. Right, so that's kind of the stress side of things. The next side that's particularly important is to make sure that you're allowing the birds to get as much nutritional value as possible to replace the minerals and the resources that they're using to grow new feathers. So what do I do? Well, first of all, I put a good general molting vitamin in their water. So something along the lines, and please, obviously everywhere in the world is going to have their own brands, their own types, but I use a product called Pre-Molt 100, and it's specifically designed for molting birds. So I find that has great sort of nutritional value, specifically aimed, and that's the key portion, for birds in the molt. The next thing I do is that I make sure the birds always have access to a good combination of eggshells and cuttlefish and oyster shells. So I mix the 3 together, and I make sure, particularly during the molting season, but also during breeding season, that they never run out of that. Okay, because they need to be replenishing what they're losing during breeding and during the molting season in particular. Your seed is very important as well. So you're wanting good, clean, fresh seed, and a good mix. So once again, that they're getting all the nutritional value that they might possibly need. So for me, I will, during the breeding season, I use this mix, and then I add things like herbs and stuff like that, and I continue that during the molt. But what sometimes you'll hear people do is that if they find the birds aren't going to molt naturally for whatever reason, the environment is the main cause of that, then they'll give the birds a reduced diet, so something along the lines of red manna and white millet only, that kind of thing. And the reason they do that is to trigger that molting process. For me, I don't really find it that necessary. I find when I split my hens and cocks, they naturally go into that molt cycle. But I have had it where I've needed to do that. So then for a short period, I'll give them a reduced sort of variety of seed, and then the moment they sort of start molting, I'll make sure that I put in all the nutrition I possibly can. In terms of soft food, I've reduced my egg food from every day because they're no longer raising chicks, and I'll give it to them twice a week during the molting period. So they're still getting the protein that they need, but they're not sort of overindulging and ending up putting on excess weight. So yeah, that's some of the nutritional stuff that I do that I find really works well. And then, yeah, so that's the sort of fundamentals of it. The other sort of big tip that I found works well in trying to help them through it is don't underestimate the importance of bathing. So what I do is I hook on baths, and cycle them through my cages during the molting season. But what I'll also do is every second day or every third day, I'll come in and I'll spray the birds as well, so that I know that even birds that don't like bathing, they're still getting that sort of benefit. And I'll find that also helps speed things up and really get the molt going. So yeah, that's just some of the tips that I use. I hope this has been helpful for you today. Please, if you can think of something else that maybe I've missed, or please feel free to put that in the comments. Let's learn from each other. This isn't all about me. This is about us as a community, a Gouldian community. So if you've got other tips that you want to add, please feel free to put that in the comments. And enjoy the rest of your day.